welcome to our webinar on the New South Wales State of the Environment Report. We've got 4 great speakers today to walk us through the report and provide some insights and reflections on the report. I'll just wait a couple of minutes because the number of participants is still going up very quickly. Just past 200. Today we've got Darcy Welsh from the EPA, who will be our main speaker talking about the State of the Environment Report. And then we'll have some reflections from some of the leading thinkers in the New South Wales environment movement. We're going to have Jeff Angel from the Total Environment Centre, George Woods from Lock the Gate, and Jacqui Mumford from the Nature Conservation Council. And then we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. We'll have 15 minutes for that. So as we go through the session, if you have a question that you want answered, use the Q&A function on Zoom, which you should find on the control panel down the bottom, and put your question in there, and we'll try to get to it during that 15-minute Q&A at the end. All right, it's 3 minutes past 1. We've got 217 people in the room, so I think we can get started. I'd like to, as always, begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on and that we live on. I'm on Gundungurra and Darug country, and I'd encourage people to share the country that you're dialing in from in the chat. It's NAIDOC week this week, and we're discussing the state of the environment, so it's as poignant as ever to offer our appreciation and respect, I think, for the First Nations people and their continued connection and stewardship over the lands and waters of this country. And also I'd like to pay respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past and present, and all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people calling in today. So just to give a brief overview of the webinar once again, we'll have Darcy providing an overview of the report, followed by a really quick reflections from 3 of the leaders in our New South Wales environment movement, Jeff Angel, George Woods, and Jacqui Mumford, reflecting on some of those key themes. And then at the end, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A. So there is a Q&A function in this Zoom webinar. Please, as we go, put your questions in the Q&A, and I'll come to those questions at the end and direct them to the appropriate speaker, panelists. We will wrap up the session by 2 p.m. so everyone can get on with their day. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our key speaker for today, which is Darcy Welsh. Darcy is the Chief Audit Executive at the EPA. Darcy worked on the report and has the difficult job today of sharing the highlights of this 676-page report in just 17 minutes. So good luck, Darcy, and over to you.
No worries. Thank you very much, Brad. So my name's Darcy Welsh. I'm from the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority. I'm the Chief Audit Executive, and I'm also the Chief Risk Officer, and I'm head of the governance, the Risk Governance and Planning Division. Part of that function collates and drafts the State of the Environment Report, along with a number of other key documents for the EPA, and we furnish it to the Minister for publishing. I'm dialing in from Burrupi land, but I'm originally from Gambeggia country, so I see a few different people from the mid-north coast dialing in, so it's good to have you on board. So I'll just start off by giving just a brief overview of how the report's developed, why it's developed, and then some of the key insights. As Brad said, it's 676 pages long, very difficult to digest in one sitting for most people, so we're here to provide some key findings and also answer some questions as best we can. I am having the connection's a little bit slow today, so somebody will be moving slides for me, so I apologise for that when you have to hear me interrupt my talking points by saying next slide. But whoever is going to coordinate those slides, could you please get up the first one, please? Next slide, let's cover that. So obviously we're here to talk about the State of the Environment Report. Some of the key discussion points, next slide. Some of the key discussion points will be what it is, how the report's produced, why it's done, and then also some of the key findings and trends, which are really the juicier parts of the report. So next slide. And next one, again, that's just our acknowledgement of country, but Brad did an awesome job of doing that at the start. So the Standard of the Environment Report is published every 3 years. It's the boring explanation is it's a legislative requirement under Section 10 of the Protection of the Environment Administration Act. As you can see on the slide, there's a number of things that we're required to include in the report, including an assessment status of the conditions of major environmental resources, so obviously our forests and our waterways, our soil, an examination of any trends. So obviously climate change is a very hot topic across the nation, and trends of those nature are included in the report. A review of programs and activities, an examination of the trends in economics analysis, and also any general recommendations for future legislative or other action. Now that's the boring legalistic explanation of why we do it. The really true reason we do it is because it provides an independent and unbiased assessment of the environment and its condition for not only Parliament, but to other government agencies, and most importantly to the public, such as yourselves and different stakeholder groups, so they can use that, they can rely on that information and know that it's not been implicitly swayed in one way or the other. Next slide, please. How the report is reduced is actually quite an extensive process. It takes us about 18 months to produce the report. So you're reading it in 2025, but it is titled 2024 because it is from last year. The data is the most recent data as of April 2024. So if anybody who reads any statistics, just keep that in mind. Or if you see something that's published earlier on in this year and it seems like it's inconsistent, that's would mainly be the reason. It takes about 12 dedicated staff, very wonderful staff within the EPA, and dozens more indirect staff within the EPA, and a number of different staff across other government agencies. As you can see, it involved 11 government agencies and state-owned corporations provided input into the report, whether it be content, data, and also peer reviewing each other's information, cross-referencing it. There's over 100 data sets and information sources that go into compiling the report. So obviously that's why we have to leverage so many other different agencies and state-owned corporations, because you really need to triangulate the data to make sure that it's accurate and it can be relied on by all the various stakeholders who will utilise the report once it's published. This information that we collect is obviously, it's used to draft the report cards, and also the other content. The report is subject to peer review by the other agencies, as I mentioned, and it's also subject to review by subject matter experts that are independent of the agency. I haven't listed them all in this presentation because I didn't want to talk for too long, but if you do read the report, the names are listed in there, and we do appreciate the input of those subject matter experts on providing feedback to the report. The process of developing it is it's coordinated by the team that I direct. It's then approved by the relevant executive director. It goes to the CEO of the EPA, who then tables it to or provides a draft to the minister, who tables it to Parliament. Once it's done, we do hold debrief sessions just to see if there's any improvements that can be made in the future, and also to help the agencies who've been involved as well better understand any of the data that's in there, because they might not have direct access to some of those data sets that we've incorporated. So it really helps them understand where they can look in the future as well. Next slide. So the key deliverables, as I mentioned, is the actual report itself that's tabled to Parliament. It's 676 pages in length. It's quite long, but we've really had a big focus over the last few years. This is the 14th SOE. So over the last 2 or 3 iterations, we've really been focusing on promoting some of the other deliverables as part of that process, which includes some of the report cards. They're about 48 pages, and it will contain all the key information from the report. So if you can't bring yourself to read the 676 page, those report cards are there. There's also a live and interactive website that's a key part of that as well. So you can come back, you can look at a particular theme or topic within the report, and then you can interact with the data how you're more comfortable with, if that's your preference. So there's always that option as well. And then we also have an obligation to update any of the information if there's been key changes in our annual reports as well that come out by the end of October. So you can also read those reports for some further information. Next slide, please. Some of the key findings, these are just some of the very high level quick snapshots, but as I said, the report cards go into a fair bit more detail, and I also have a couple of key points that I've noted down that I wanted to share with everybody as well. So from the land, the overall assessment is that most of the soils are in moderate condition. The agricultural land has become slightly more acidic over time, but we have seen a drop in hill slope erosion. There's some of the key findings from that. In regards to waters, river conditions, the water, well, in general, swimming sites and water condition is reasonable across the state, but we are seeing very poor condition or very poor conditions down in the Murray-Darling Basin, which is obviously quite problematic. In regards to groundwater, we've also seen, 75% of all groundwater in New South Wales is also used for agriculture, and we're seeing 250 towns across the state are now reliant on groundwater compared to other access. Swimming sites are graded good. Swimming sites graded very good or good have declined very slightly from 80% to 73% between 2021-2022 financial year and the 2022-23 financial year, so a slight reduction. Fish stocks listed as depleted, as being depleted have increased slightly as well, and we're seeing quite a reduction in kelp forests, so we've lost about 25%, 25 to 22% from the 2019 baselines. And then in regards to air quality is stable, meets the standards most of the time. There's only been 47 days, in 2023, which was the most recent year we have the data for, where pollutants have exceeded those levels. And the days we're seeing those exceedances are predominantly around natural disasters, if you're having bushfires, things like that. On a more positive note, in roughly 20 years, the greenhouse gases have reduced by the greenhouse gas emissions have reduced by 27%, which is also quite good. The electricity generation is still the highest emitter, followed by transport, where we haven't seen a lot of movement in greenhouse gas emissions in that time. Next slide, please. Back, please. And before we get to people in industry, biodiversity is obviously a very interesting topic that I haven't included in the slides directly, but I just wanted to touch on it. The ability of New South Wales vegetation to support native plants and animals in the ecosystem has fallen to 29% of natural levels compared to industrialisation, and the number of threatened species have slightly increased by 18 species between 2020 and 2024. Rates of native forestry harvesting have dropped 61% since 2017, and only 50% of the 657 plant species listed as threatened are predicted to still be alive in 100 years' time. In regards to people in industry, one of the biggest trends we're seeing in general is that the environmental outcomes and health is being progressively decoupled from people in industrialization. So we're seeing better environmental outcomes independent of what we're doing in that space, but we're still seeing, obviously negative trends in general. So there's been a major increase in electricity share delivered by renewable energy generation, and in 2023 there was about 34% of state's electricity generation was made up of that. In 2023, the vehicles on New South Wales roads travelled 74.8 billion kilometres, which is just a staggering number to think of, which is a 12% increase since 2004, despite an increase in those electricity vehicle sales. As I said, transport still continues to be a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And then total waste generation is increasing faster than population. So if anybody has been reading on the news, you would have seen announcements by the government in recent times regarding the waste capacity or the capacity of the Sydney area to actually manage that waste and what that will mean like post 2030. obviously the data that we're receiving through this process and delivering in these reports has resulted in some key changes in that space and identified some key areas such as those capacity issues. So when I say it's increased, that is a per capita increase. So per person is producing more waste now than they were in the previous period. And then we've also seen a relatively stable number of contaminated sites, which is positive to see. Obviously, contaminated sites and legacy contamination is not something that we want a lot of. Next slide, please. So as I said, some of the ongoing challenges that we face in relation to emissions is climate change is placing an increased pressure on the environment, natural disasters and so forth, increases in sea levels, temperature rises, rainfall patterns. Obviously, we've just experienced some quite extensive flooding on the mid-north coast. So anybody who's lived here wouldn't be the first flood that they've been through, but we are seeing a more drastic escalation of those events. The transition to renewable energy needs to be faster if we're going to meet our 2030 targets. And as I've highlighted a number of times, transport is a key factor in meeting those targets. Despite the population and economics decoupling, as I mentioned, human activities, agriculture, urbanisation has resulted in some soil degradation, poor water quality, air pollution, and destruction of these ecosystems. And that's obviously best highlighted in the number of endangered species. Clearing of the native vegetation continues to fragment the habitat, reduce the capacity of the land to support native plants, animals, and ecosystems, which I've mentioned a number of times. One interesting part for the next top point is this State of the Environment report. It's the first time we've ever included a Voice of Country section, which has included a truth-telling piece and has reflected our statement of commitment to Aboriginal people. So I do encourage people to go and read that. It's a very powerful piece that has given a member of our Aboriginal People's Knowledge Group, which is an independent group that advises us on Aboriginal knowledge. It's given them the avenue to provide their truth in an unvetted, unsanitized forum, and it has resulted in some very key changes in the way that we're looking at some of the problems we're facing and how we're dealing with, say, legacy contamination. So I do encourage people to read that because it really highlights the powerful nature of those truth-telling pieces. And then the other big thing I'll call out is anybody who has read the report or they've read the report cards is there are data gaps, and there has been for a number of years in some of the metrics or areas that we're trying to measure. There's a number of those where there's either no data or there's very poor data quality. So it's very difficult to track trends. So that's one of the key challenges that we'll face in preparation for the next report. The next few iterations of the reports is how we address that, whether we develop better data sources, whether we invest more into tracking them more regularly, or whether there are more appropriate measures that can be that are readily available to be better indicators. So that's definitely a key challenge. Next slide, please. So yeah, key responses. I just wanted to flag some of the other information sources that people might be interested in reading that come off the back of this report or go hand in hand with this report, and will help better understand about how government agencies or the government in general are trying to respond to these problems. So there's the Net Zero Plan, Stage 1, the 20 to 2030 plan. So I do encourage people to read that. It outlines the New South Wales Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap, outlines the 20-year plan of how we're going to integrate to renewable energy. In regards to circular economy, there's the New South Wales Waste and Sustainable Material Strategy 2041, which sets out the 20-year vision for reducing waste and changing how we produce, consume and recycle products. And anybody who watches this space closely would have seen a bill reintroduced recently over the last few months about embedding those principles into the circular economy in relation to batteries. And then there's also the New South Wales Plastic Action Plan. So that's addressing, the plastic life cycle in a three-part approach to reducing the harm associated with the production of and life cycle management of plastics. And anybody who watched this space would have seen some of the work we've done in the past in trying to promote the reduction of, littering, and also how to better manage plastics in the future. And that's obviously an emerging space where we continue to invest in developing technology. Say, for example, we have a grant out recently, I think it was a $60 million grant that was aimed at developing new technologies that can better dispose or break down plastics so that, when they meet the end of their useful life, that we can dispose of them and manage them in an environmentally friendly way. Next slide. In regards to biodiversity, there's a lot that have gone on to that space. In that space, there's the Saving Our Species program, which I think is a big piece that we should highlight. One of the things that I'd flag with people is there was an audit done by the Audit Office of New South Wales on that program last year. So if anybody wants to read another independent agency's assessment of that program, please go and read that. And also the Biodiversity Indicator program, which is collecting, monitoring, assessing various information on the status and trends of biodiversity in the state. And obviously, as I said, we're very focused on making sure that we can use data in a very useful way moving forward. And then there's the New South Wales Water Strategy as well, which was launched in September 2021. Next slide. And
Great timing, Darcy. Somehow you managed to whip through that in just the right amount of time. So thank you so much for coming on and giving us all that very broad overview of what is a giant piece of work. But I think it's also a clarion call and a very concerning report with so many indicators, trending down and down. And that statistic you shared, that the carrying capacity of our state to support nature and plants is now at just 29% of what it was before colonization. I think that's a very, very scary statistic. And I think for a lot of us, we kind of want to put this in context of, the work that's been done over time by the government, changes that have happened over the last few decades. And that brings us to our next speaker, which is Jeff Angel. And I just want to throw to Jeff to get a really quick response to the State of the Environment report and how you see it. Jeff's been working on nature and environment in New South Wales for over 35 years with a range of community environment groups. Especially working on waste, but working across the whole spectrum of the environment. So very good to have you on this webinar, Jeff, to provide your reflections and thoughts in 4 or 5 minutes. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Brad, and hello, everyone. I'm on Gadigal land in our small Surrey Hills office. I'll begin by saying that the environment movement was a very strong advocate for state of the environment reporting, and we certainly achieved that in New South Wales, both at state and local government level. And of course, you'll know we also have a national SOE report process. These documents are very important in terms of transparency of the information about the state of our environment and accountability. And the critical question that we must ask every time we get our regular SOE reports is, has those reports led to change, real genuine change? I'm going to talk about very briefly about a few of the waste and the air quality issues. I know my colleagues are going to do an excellent job on biodiversity, the land and climate. But it's interesting to look at waste. One of the key indicators is that we produce 891,000 tonnes of plastic, and only 40% of it's recycled. There's 2.7 tonnes of waste per person per year, and it's getting worse. Metropolitan or municipal solid waste, we apparently recycle about 49% of it. The issue is that those statistics, unless we have pretty fundamental interventions, are going to get worse. And as you saw mentioned about some recent legislation, we're starting to look at the life cycle of products from design to use to disposal, and hopefully converting that into a circular economy. Air quality. One of the interesting things in the document was that air quality may decline unless we reduce fossil fuel use in transport. Not particularly surprising, but it does give you an extra element of drive for electrifying the transport system. That has been a long-running issue in New South Wales. Every time we put in place pollution controls, population growth outran population growth, and the increased use of vehicles outran the quality improvement in air. And the really fundamental change, of course, is to get the transport system off fossil fuels. Was mentioned that we're starting to decouple population and environment from adverse impacts. And one of the examples, of course, is that our per capita emissions from the use of electricity are declining because we're converting to renewables, and that's the inevitable result of a fundamental change in the way society uses energy. It's in fact a key indicator of whether we are improving our carrying capacity. Now, unfortunately, this report does not estimate our carrying capacity for the state. The carrying capacity for the number of people and for the level of economic activity, often referred to as our environmental footprint. And I recall in one of the very early SOEs, New South Wales did estimate its environmental footprint. Not surprisingly, at that time, and probably now, our environmental footprint was a lot larger than the actual state of New South Wales. The critical aspect of improving the state of the environment is to change the underlying impacts of economic activity. You can find in that report quite a good discussion of how to assess and monitor our carrying capacity or our impact at a whole economy level, and the types of decision tools that you might create in order to influence that carrying capacity and to improve our performance. But that's all it does. It lists a range of responses under all those headings, but it doesn't say what works best. You know, we often get these reports from government, and the EPA has done an excellent job of as far as it goes, but we often get these reports from government with a simple listing or case studies of what they've done, but no real assessment by the independent panel, or in fact the government, if it was in a frank mood, of what actually had worked best. So I do think that the SOE reports need to evolve further so that we're told, well, this particular policy mechanism or this particular economic instrument worked and this one didn't, and we should start looking at the ones that work best. So that's my overall view of the state of the environment reporting and how we can improve things. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, for those wise reflections. Always great to get your input and your thoughts. All right, well, our next speaker is George Woods from Lock the Gate. George is Head of Research and Investigations at Lock the Gate, and she has spent over 20 years in activism and advocacy, both for the climate and for the protection of biodiversity, for various causes and groups. So thanks for joining us, George, and over to you for your 4 or 5 minutes of reflections.
Thank you very much, Brad. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see some familiar names in the chat this morning and to be joined on this webinar by Jeff Angel and all the NCC crew. I am actually coming to you today from Wadawurrung country in Victoria. I am no longer a New South Wales local, but have dedicated much of my life to protecting the environment of New South Wales, so very glad to be here. Maybe just show my first slide. I'm going to talk just about the climate change aspects of the State of the Environment report mostly. That is the swirl of ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, which made landfall not in New South Wales, but not very far from New South Wales at the beginning of this year. And the poleward shift of strong tropical cyclones is going to be one of the ongoing effects of climate change that New South Wales will be having to grapple with. Next slide, please. So the State of the Environment report does talk a bit about the consequences of climate change for New South Wales. It gives us the statistic that in the 3 years to 2024, New South Wales suffered the sort of officially designated 62 natural disasters over just 3 years that caused, probably $4 billion in damage, but it wasn't clear whether that was just insured losses or a broader damage calculation. Killed 13 people and left 12,000 homes uninhabitable. Now, just for context, there were about 45,500 new homes built in New South Wales last year. So that's a lot of habitation that people are losing to climate change already. And that estimate, all those numbers don't include events that have occurred so far this year, I think, although Darcy's comments made me think that might not be the case. The State of the Environment report also mentions that globally, the world has crossed 5 of 9 what they call planetary boundaries. It's a very sort of technical sounding word for a quite terrifying circumstance, which is that there is a sort of an envelope of habitability, an envelope of living conditions that we human beings and all of the beautiful plants and animals that we share the earth with have lived in for the past certainly 12,000 years, but much, much longer really. And there's a bunch of planetary boundaries that scientists have said, once we change this thing this much, we're kind of entering uncharted territory, going into tipping points. And the State of the Environment report sort of rather clinically reports that we have crossed 5 of 9 of those boundaries, and 2 more are close to being crossed. And I think it sort of illustrates for me one of the real interesting points about this report and what we've heard so far this afternoon, because information is useful, but what's happening to the people and environment of New South Wales is really happening because of a matter of values and judgment. And it's really what we do with information that counts. And I think many of us many decades ago thought, once we have reporting, regular reporting about what's happening to the environment, things will start to change because everybody will see, species are being driven to extinction. The Murray-Darling Basin is in crisis. We're crossing planetary boundaries. But it turns out that it doesn't follow that just because you collect data and report on it, a society, changes the way that it makes its decisions, because decisions are things that are based much more on values. Despite the Net Zero Future Act that was passed at the end of 2023, New South Wales is not yet on track to achieve its emissions reduction commitments, and it is slipping behind on both adaptation and mitigation of climate change. And that's going to matter a lot for all of us on this call. I thought it was interesting too that the State of the Environment report said it's difficult to attribute the weather events that New South Wales has been experiencing lately to climate change. And that's kind of a true-ish statement from a statistical point of view, but it's also not true at all. People understand that what is happening to them and the world around them is unprecedented, is getting worse, and I think, again, it reflects that that statistics and data have to be used and kept in their place and not sort of stood in for a much more important question of what kind of values we have and whether in New South Wales we want to change the way we value and make decisions about our environment. Next slide. This is I'm just concentrating on the coal mining industry because it is true that New South Wales' emissions are coming down. We're having to rely a lot on the electricity sector to get us towards New South Wales's greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, because the coal-fired power stations are going to be closing over the next few years progressively. And we rely on the land sector to absorb a lot of carbon dioxide, and we haven't really yet done the tricky job of decarbonising industry in New South Wales. One of those industries is the coal mining industry, which actually has plans to expand in the next few years. And I wanted to show this chart I've drawn out from the New South Wales emissions projections, just the emissions attributable to the coal mining industry. And this is the current policies projection, i.e. stuff that New South Wales has, is undertaking. And you can see this strange and terrible bump between roughly 2021 or two and towards the end of this decade, where coal mining emissions are actually going up in New South Wales. And that means they are coming at the cost of every other sector in the state that will have to work harder to ensure that New South Wales achieves its emissions reduction commitments and protects people and landscapes from catastrophic global warming. I just have one more thing to say, I guess, further to my theme for my final slide, because I think that one of the really important things that we can all take from this is that when the environment is degraded and suffering and under great stress, so are people, because we're part of it. And so I think this is an invitation, really, this moment that we're in as everything is changing and we're receiving these terrible report cards about the state of our environment, to embrace an ethos of sustainability that's not just about accounting and numbers and auditing and dollars, but is really about what kind of lives we want to live together. Because I think we can improve the lives of everyone in New South Wales if we change the way we think about environmental degradation. And the moves that the EPA and other agencies are making towards incorporating First Nations cultural knowledge and worldviews into their work and perspectives is, I hope, going to go some part towards taking us there. But I think it's up to all of us as well on this call to do that. So I really appreciate the time to come and chat with you about it. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, George. Thanks so much, as always, for sharing your wisdom. And it's a good point. Thanks to the 290 people that have taken the time out of their day to join this call. I also want to acknowledge that we have quite a few councillors on the call and some MPs. So I just want to acknowledge all those elected representatives who have taken the time out of their busy day to come along. And it's so crucial that our elected representatives are well informed. And I think the State of the Environment report provides a great opportunity for that. Our next speaker is Jacqui Mumford. Jacqui, since 2022, has been the CEO of the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales, dedicated to the growth of the environment movement and the impact of the environment movement. So over to you, Jacqui, for your reflections on this report.
Thanks, Brad. I'll just start by acknowledging the country that I'm on. I'm on the land of the Awabakal people here in Newcastle, and I want to pay my respects and further what George said around the importance of incorporating First Nations knowledge and that incredibly rich culture and history that we're so privileged to have here in New South Wales, and really bringing that into informing how we manage the environment in New South Wales. I've got the somewhat challenging job of talking about opportunities from here, or, how do we sort of look at what is ultimately very grim news and a sort of dark assessment of the trajectory of management of environment in New South Wales, and how do we do something about it, basically? What action can we take? And certainly as a first step, it's incredibly heartening to have so many of you on the call to tune in and to hear from the EPA and from the environment movement about this issue in, what can actually be, could be a really dry and, as we've heard, data heavy report, that, we're actually seeing this as an opportunity for improving how we manage the environment in New South Wales. Thanks, Sam. So I just wanted to jump into some of the things that really stood out to me in the report. So the first one is on biodiversity. I just want to mention, and next slide, thank you. This is a summary of the report card of what the State of the Environment report says about the sort of conditions or status of our plant species in New South Wales. And as you can see, for every indicator there, it's poor and getting worse. The number of threatened plant species increased by 18 between 2020 and 2024, bringing the total number to 657 threatened plant species. And without effective management, only 50% of those 657 plants will be around in the next 100 years. The report does name some of the driving threats to our plant species and why we're seeing this awful situation where the conditions are poor and getting worse, and it really comes down to land clearing, pollution, invasive species, and climate change, as George mentioned. And it's come up, I think Darcy mentioned and Brad reiterated, that the ability of New South Wales vegetation to support our sort of the support systems around native plants in our ecosystems has fallen 29% from the natural levels before industrialisation. So, really significant decline there. Next slide, thanks, Sam. This one's for mammals and animal species in New South Wales. You can see again the number of threatened animal species is largely poor and getting worse, the indicators for how we manage our animal populations. So for threatened animal species in New South Wales, listings have increased by 18 since the last report card in 2021, bringing the total to 343. And again, only 50% of those listed threatened species are expected to still be around in 100 years under a business as usual scenario. So really alarming reflection of biodiversity in New South Wales in this report card, and the key drivers being sort of identified there around land clearing. And obviously we know that if we want to support threatened species, we need to protect and restore their habitat. And certainly at the moment in New South Wales, we're seeing land clearing and native forest logging continue unabated. So it's really important that if we're serious about turning around this trajectory of decline, that we get some of those threatening processes in check. Next slide, please, Sam. Inland rivers has also been mentioned a few times, and I just really wanted to cast the spotlight a bit more on inland rivers, if you like, because it's an area that we campaign on here at NCC. And the Murray-Darling Basin is, obviously a hugely important ecological system for New South Wales, but also people and the livelihoods of those river communities and people who live along the river and rely on the river. Associated with environmental decline is also huge, socioeconomic impacts. And so I think it's really important just to, to remember that, particularly when we're talking about inland rivers, we're talking about town water for people and the cultural importance of rivers for First Nations people and so on. So since 2021, 190 fish death events have been recorded. And obviously, as Darcy said, that's up to the end of last year. So that doesn't even include this year where we've seen more fish kill events. And for our inland wetlands there, only 12% are protected in New South Wales. And certainly the implications of that are really grim, where we see threats like gold mining being proposed in Ramsar listed wetlands. Loss of river connectivity and access to water obviously has huge human health impacts, as I mentioned, as well as ecological impacts. And here in New South Wales, rivers in New South Wales are being chronically mismanaged. These are they're not ephemeral systems, but they're being treated that way by government agencies who are responsible for managing them. We need to see connectivity in inland rivers and environment and human health being given the same precedence that is currently being given to industry, particularly cotton growers in the northern part of the basin who are being allowed to over-extract so that downstream communities are missing out on water. And I just wanted to pick up on one thing that George also mentioned around the those indicators, the planetary boundaries model, because when I was reading through the report, that was something that really, really struck me. And a lot of the indicators for plant conditions that align with land system change and biosphere integrity, planetary boundaries, are being crossed. Similarly for the indicators for animals and rivers, the indicators of biosphere integrity are also being crossed. And I would encourage you to go and have a look at the report cards and have a look at those global reporting models and what's meant by those planetary boundaries, because, you know, often when we talk about how environment, you know, the natural environment and the natural world is in decline in New South Wales, it's quite, you know, we can use quite emotional language, but, you know, as George said, the report uses clinical language to describe these things, which are actually quite frankly terrifying. So I would encourage you to go and have a look and read about what those indicators mean, because if we don't reverse these trends, as we cross these boundaries, we are entering catastrophic and irreversible zones where, you know, we are talking about threats to life on Earth. So having said all of that, I do just want to mention what some of the opportunities are around trying to intervene in how New South Wales government manages the natural world. So if I could just have the next slide, Sam. The silver lining, if you like, or the good news, is that our government knows there's a problem. You know, we've got this report card. It's not the first time. We know that these systems are in decline. Both New South Wales and federal governments are at least acknowledging that this can't continue, that we need to turn it around. And so somebody mentioned in the questions there about the Henry review of the Biodiversity Conservation Act, which happened a couple of years ago. The government did respond to that review. They are acknowledging that the Biodiversity Conservation Act does nothing to conserve biodiversity in this state, and that they have a plan, they have a strategy to try and turn it around. Similarly, at a federal level, we have a government committed to reforming our federal nature law, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, in this term of government. But we know that these reforms will not be good enough. They will not even touch the sides unless we push the government to do what's required to meet the scale of the challenge at hand. So across biodiversity, there are opportunities for reform, and we'll post some links in the chat around how you can put in a submission to a government process that's happening right now around how we manage land clearing. And similarly on inland rivers, and the next slide, Sam, I just wanted to mention that again, the government has the answers to how we turn some of these things around. So they commissioned a report which was finalised in 2024, which talks about how we can restore connectivity around our inland rivers. So these ideas are not, you know, it's not an unfamiliar. I suppose what I'm trying to say is the silver lining is the government knows some of the answers. These are huge problems. We know what's required to turn them around, but it won't happen, as George said, from a values perspective, unless we really push them. So I just want to finish on that note, that there is an opportunity to intervene in some of these processes, and for us as a movement to really shape some of these outcomes.
Thank you so much, Jacqui, for those ideas about how we do have the solutions to these challenges and we can take them forward. All right, we've got 10 minutes left, so let's get into some of the Q&A. Thanks to everyone who's been posting in the chat and also posting questions in the Q&A section. We've got 22 questions there, so maybe if you have a scroll through, if you're interested in one of those questions, give it a little thumbs up and we'll try and prioritize those ones. There's been quite a few people mentioning decoupling. So Darcy, I'd like to come to you first on that one. We've got a few questions there. What did you mean by that? What does it mean to say that environmental outcomes are being increasingly decoupled from the industry, health and economic indicators? And maybe you could give an example about how those things were coupled and are no longer coupled.
Yeah, no way. So I think, and that's a great question, right? Like it's not always the most easily understood terms. Anybody out there who asked that question, you know, that's totally understandable. I think the best way to explain it would just be to illustrate an example. So greenhouse gases are probably the most readily understandable example. So what we mean by decoupling is traditionally, like through industrialization, you'd see an increase in production and like economic production, and then you'd also see like an almost directly like a trend that would directly correlate with that increase in industrialization with the output of greenhouse gases. I think Jeff said something similar along those lines. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong if I misparaphrased you there. But what we're seeing now is, because of the increase in renewable energy generation and other modes of transport, either by it being a focus on an increase in public transport, or whether it's by utilizing different vehicles, by say they're hybrids or electric vehicles, we're seeing us to be able to either sustain or increase that economic production without increasing greenhouse gas emissions, or in this case, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. So that's probably the best example of that. So it's really about being able to maintain production without the negative environmental impacts that it has. Simple solution, hard to implement.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. I think another example you mentioned earlier was that there's been a 61% in native forest logging in New South Wales. But of course, now we're getting, I think it's 91% of the timber needs for construction from plantations. So another opportunity where an industry has transitioned to more sustainable.
And on that point, just quickly, I think sometimes it's like some of the findings in the report can be quite stark, but I think it's also important to, when we're framing some of these issues, is to really highlight what things could have looked like without intervention. Now, I'm an apolitical government employee. I'm not here to promote any government of any shade or colour, but just in general, I think it's also important to highlight for engagement purposes and for empowerment purposes to say, listen, by getting this intervention, we've had this outcome, and perhaps with a little bit more engagement, we could get even better outcomes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Darcy. All right, I want to move on now to a question around land clearing rates. So this one's from John Benson. Given that land clearing rates after the laws were weakened in 2016 have gone up, what changes are being made or need to be made now to remove exemptions or get that back on track? And there's probably one for Jacqui, but maybe also Jeff, because I know, Jeff, you were involved in setting up the Native Vegetation Act way back when, was that 2004? And obviously that's changed a lot in the meantime. So what's needed to get that indicator headed back in the right direction? Do you want to kick off, Jacqui, and then maybe Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. As I mentioned, there was a statutory review of the Biodiversity Conservation Act, which was conducted by Ken Henry. If anybody hasn't seen that review, I encourage you just to read the front page. It is absolutely scathing. And as I said, the Biodiversity Conservation Act is not conserving biodiversity in the state. The good news is, before the state election 2 years ago, the New South Wales government signalled a desire to run in runaway land clearing. As I mentioned, they will do some, they will go some way to doing that, and they've indicated that in their response to the review. They are doing a nature strategy here in New South Wales. There is a serious risk that will not go, it won't go far enough. It won't do what's required, and standing up against landholders, standing up against industries that are driving these trends is hard for government. They won't take it on if they don't have the political will to do it. And as George said, it's a values question as well. So, as a movement, what we want to do is really take this opportunity and say, it doesn't happen every day that the government is willing to take on agriculture and development and so on in the interest of the environment, and really make them feel the pressure around that, and really, make sure that it happens in a way that is meaningful and can actually turn around that trajectory of decline. When the SLATS data is overdue to come out in the next few weeks, which is basically the land clearing data that indicates how our rates of land clearing across New South Wales. When that legislation changed over the years since 2016, land clearing tripled. So when the coalition government introduced the Biodiversity Conservation Act, they sort of opened up open slather in a lot of ways across the state for clearing of vegetation, and we really need to turn that back around. So we'll, as I said, we'll put in a link for how you can write a submission into a process that's happening right now around our land clearing codes here in New South Wales. And it is quite technical, but we've put some language together and we've really broken it down so that you can engage with that process in a meaningful way, so that we can signal to the government that we're watching, that there are people out here who care about these issues. It's not just developers pushing back, but it's also people saying, we want a legacy here in New South Wales of protecting nature. And in another 3 years' time, when the next State of the Environment report comes out, I really don't want to be sitting here having this conversation again, saying conditions have gone from bad to worse and they're continuing to decline. So I think we really need to get active. These processes are happening, and there is an opportunity right now to jump in and try and steer it.
Thanks, Jacqui. That's a very clear thing that people can do. We did have a question, I guess, that sort of builds on that, which is from Abby around George's great point on what are we doing other than simply collecting data for reports like these? What role does the public have to play in how this information is used? And George, given that was your point, I wonder if you want to tackle that one first.
I will, and then I really would like to hear what Jeff has to say about the repeal of the Native Vegetation Act, because I think actually it's a really good example of how really turning around the catastrophic collapse of the life systems that obviously support our own society, but I know many of you, like me, are great lovers of the natural world, and so all the beautiful animals and plants that we share the world with. But turning that around isn't something that you can force a government to do in the teeth of economic and social resistance. The Native Vegetation Act was repealed because New South Wales and Australia had not changed their cultural relationship with trees, is my view. And if we force the government to make laws that then get repealed, we just keep on going around the roundabout. So I guess my message, my answer to your prompt, Brad, is all of you 290 odd people who've spent an hour today talking about this are in the community, are out there, and we need to have a cultural and social approach to these problems. The politics follows society and culture. That's really where I think the change comes, from the bottom up. What do you reckon, Jeff?
Yes, all decisions are political. Having information is not sufficient on its own without massive community and sustained pressure on politicians. When we did get the original under Carr Native Vegetation Act, they had a clear electoral promise to end broad-scale clearing. Now, as George has alluded to, that was such a dramatic systemic change that the opponents got organised and the government changed, and the National Party continued their depredations on the New South Wales environment, particularly the land. One of the things that TEC is now investigating and how to be strategic is on the issue of rights of nature, which imply a very different relationship to the land and biodiversity that we now have, where we are the stewards or we are the users and we have to be responsible exploiters. But in fact, if you can inject both at a social values level and a legal level, that nature in itself has a right to exist, then we can start changing the values. And having that conversation about the rights of nature is part of that conversation about changing our perspective on how we live on the planet. So one of the things I've become increasingly interested in is systemic change. And that means that when George gets out of bed every day, all the bad decisions, or the majority of the bad decisions, have already been deleted from the agenda by the system, rather than us having to campaign case by case, issue by issue, location by location. That's what I think we're all aspiring to.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Look, everyone, it's been a fantastic discussion. There's still some really pressing questions in the Q&A about marine and plastics and other things. What we'll do from here, I just want to thank everyone for joining. I want to especially thank the speakers and Darcy from the EPA for jumping on and sharing all this information with us. Shortly after the webinar, everyone who registered will receive an email with some of the links that we promised. And then next week we'll publish this recording and also try to publish any other answers that we can provide to those Q&As that we didn't get to today. Sorry we didn't get to them all. Thank you so much for the great discussion. Yeah, and looking forward to the next time we get to come together and figure out the way forward for protecting nature and helping it thrive in New South Wales. Thanks everyone for a great session, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.